In the shadowed halls of Haverford Manor, a priceless Venetian mirror vanishes without a trace, leaving only a smudge and a scratch. Miss Jane Marple, with her keen eyes and quiet wisdom, unravels a web of secrets among 4 suspects. A loyal butler, hiding debts, a charming widow with costly tastes, a struggling decorator with a crowbar, and a collector consumed by obsession. As village whispers and subtle clues point to a midnight cart and a city vault, Marple's gentle probing reveals a truth driven by passion and betrayal. Will the manor's heart be restored, or will its secrets remain in shadow? Chapter 1. The Manor's Pride. The autumn sun cast a golden haze over St. Mary Mead, its light filtering through the ancient elms that lined the lane to Haverford Manor. The manor itself, a sprawling edifice of weathered stone, stood as a testament to centuries of Ashford lineage, its ivy-clad walls whispering tales of grandeur and loss. Within its grand hall hung the pride of the estate, a Venetian mirror, its gilded frame a delicate filigree of arabesques, crafted in the workshops of Murano in the 17th century. Its glass, faintly clouded by time, held an almost mystical allure, reflecting the flickering candlelight of countless Ashford gatherings. To Lady Beatrice Ashford, widowed mistress of the manor, it was more than an heirloom. It was the soul of her home. On a crisp morning in late October, Lady Beatrice descended the oak staircase, her footsteps muffled by the thick Persian runner. She paused, as was her custom, to admire the mirror's intricate beauty. But the wall was bare. A faint smudge, like the ghost of a careless hand, marked the oak panel where the mirror had hung. Her breath caught, and a chill unrelated to the autumn air crept through her. The mirror, a fixture as immutable as the manor itself, was gone. No splintered wood or shattered glass betrayed a struggle. The theft was clean, deliberate. She rang for Mr. Clarence, the butler, her voice sharp with alarm. Mr. Clarence, a man whose starched collar seemed an extension of his rigid demeanour, appeared promptly. His grey eyes widened at the sight of the empty wall. "Madam, this is unthinkable," he murmured, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. He confirmed the hall had been locked the previous evening, as always, after a small gathering of guests. Lady Beatrice, her composure fraying, recounted the night's attendees. Mr. Clarence himself, who had served with his usual precision. Mrs. Evelyn Warrender, a vivacious widow visiting from London. Mr. Hugo Vance, the decorator overseeing the manor's refurbishment. And Mr. Roland Pike, a collector whose eyes had lingered too long on the mirror's frame. Each had praised the piece, their voices echoing in the hall's high ceiling, but none had hinted at mischief. By mid-morning, Lady Beatrice's agitation had grown. She dispatched a note to her old friend Miss Jane Marple, whose unassuming presence and sharp intellect had resolved many a village conundrum. Miss Marple arrived just before noon, her black shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, a wicker knitting bag swinging gently at her side. Her eyes, bright and bird-like behind her spectacles, took in the hall's sombre mood. Lady Beatrice, seated in a high-backed chair by the fireplace, poured out her distress. "Jane, it's not just the mirror's value," she said, her voice trembling. "It's as if part of the manor's heart has been stolen." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her needles clicking softly as she listened. She noted the hall's grandeur. The polished floor, the heavy drapes, the portraits of stern Ashfords gazing down. The empty space on the wall seemed an affront to the room's harmony. "Tell me, Beatrice," she said, her voice calm. Who was in the hall last night? And what did they say about the mirror? Lady Beatrice recounted the evening's details. The dinner, the casual conversation, the guests' admiration of the mirror's craftsmanship. Mrs. Warrender had called it divine. Mr. Vance had sketched its frame in his notebook, and Mr. Pike had spoken of its rarity with a fervour that bordered on reverence. Mr. Clarence, ever dutiful, had ensured the hall was secure before retiring. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze drifting to the smudge on the wall. "No signs of a break-in, you say?" she asked. Lady Beatrice nodded, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. "The windows were latched, the doors bolted." "Clarence is meticulous." Miss Marple rose, her movements deliberate, and examined the wall. The smudge was faint, possibly from a gloved hand, and the mirror's fixings were intact, suggesting careful removal. "A heavy piece," she murmured, almost to herself, "not the work of an opportunist." She turned to Lady Beatrice, her smile gentle, but her eyes keen. "I shall need to speak with each of them, my dear. People, you know, often reveal more than they intend." As Lady Beatrice summoned the household, Miss Marple stood by the hearth, her knitting resumed, her mind already sifting through the threads of the evening. The mirror's absence was no mere theft. It was a puzzle, one woven from human desires and secrets. In St. Mary Mead, she knew, even the grandest manor held shadows, and she was determined to bring them to light. Chapter 2. The Butler's Tale. The morning sun, though bright, did little to warm the chill that had settled over Haverford Manor. The grand hall, bereft of its Venetian mirror, seemed diminished, its oak-panelled walls absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a corner of the drawing-room with her knitting bag at her feet, observed the household's subdued bustle. Servants moved quietly, their whispers a soft undercurrent to the clink of china being cleared from the breakfast table. Lady Beatrice Ashford, still pale from the morning's shock, had retired to her private sitting room, leaving Miss Marple to begin her inquiries. The first to be questioned was Mr. Clarence, the butler, a man whose 30 years of service to the Ashfords had made him as much a fixture of the manor as the missing mirror itself. Miss Marple found him in the pantry, a narrow room lined with shelves of gleaming silver and crystal. The air smelled faintly of polish and wax and Mr. Clarence stood at a small table, methodically buffing a silver candelabrum. His movements were precise, almost ritualistic, as if the act of polishing could restore order to the disrupted manor. He was a tall man, nearing 60, with a face lined by years of discretion. His grey hair was neatly combed, his black coat immaculate, but Miss Marple noted a slight stoop in his shoulders, a hint of weariness that belied his composed exterior. When she entered, he looked up, his grey eyes meeting hers with a flicker of unease before he resumed his task. "Good morning, Mr. Clarence," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle, but carrying the quiet authority of one accustomed to being heard. "I hope I'm not interrupting. Lady Beatrice has asked me to look into the matter of the mirror, and I thought you might help me piece together last night's events." Mr. Clarence set down the candelabrum, his hands folding neatly behind his back. "Of course, Miss Marple," he said, his tone formal, but not unwelcoming. "I am at your service. This is a distressing business, and I assure you, I know nothing of how it came to pass." Miss Marple settled into a wooden chair by the pantry's small window, her knitting needles emerging from her bag with a soft clink. The rhythm of her knitting was steady, almost hypnotic, as she began. "You've been with the Ashfords a long time, I understand." 30 years, Lady Beatrice said, "a remarkable tenure." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, a touch of pride softening his voice. "I began as a footman under Sir Henry, Lady Beatrice's late husband. I've served the family through 3 generations." His gaze drifted briefly to the candelabrum, as if anchoring himself to the familiar. "And the mirror," Miss Marple continued, her needles clicking softly. "It's been in the hall as long as you've been here, I presume?" "Indeed, ma'am." It was a wedding gift to Sir Henry's grandmother, brought from Venice by her father. "A rare piece, they say. I've polished its frame myself many times, though carefully, mind you. The gilding is delicate." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. "You were in the hall last night, during the gathering. Tell me, what do you recall of the evening?" Mr. Clarence's expression tightened, his lips pressing into a thin line. "It was a small affair, ma'am. Lady Beatrice hosted a dinner for her guests, Mrs. Warrender, Mr. Vance, and Mr. Pike. I served the meal, roast pheasant, I believe, and ensured the wine was poured. The conversation was lively, as it often is with such she-will company. They spoke of the manor's history, and the mirror came up naturally." "It always does naturally," Miss Marple echoed, her tone encouraging. "And what was said about it?" Mr. Clarence hesitated, his fingers twitching slightly at his sides. "Mrs. Warrender admired its elegance, said it reminded her of a piece she'd seen in Florence. Mr. Vance, the decorator, was quite taken with its craftsmanship. He mentioned it would be the centrepiece of the hall's new design. Mr. Pike," he paused, his brow furrowing. "Mr. Pike spoke of its historical value, ma'am. He seemed particularly interested. Asked Lady Beatrice if she'd ever considered selling it." Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second, then resumed their rhythm. "And Lady Beatrice's response?" "She laughed it off," Mr. Clarence said. "Said the mirror was part of the manor's soul, not for sale at any price." Mr. Pike nodded, but I thought he looked disappointed. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. "You have a keen eye, Mr. Clarence. What else did you notice? Any tensions among the guests?" He shook his head, though his hesitation suggested he was sifting through memories. "Nothing overt, ma'am. Mrs. Warrender was her usual charming self, though perhaps a touch more animated than usual. Mr. Vance kept to himself, sketching in that notebook of his. Mr. Pike was quieter after the mirror was discussed, but I put it down to his nature. He's a reserved sort. Collectors often are." "And you, Mr. Clarence," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but probing. "What did you do after the dinner?" "I cleared the table, ma'am, and ensured the hall was tidy." The guests lingered over coffee until about 9:30. Mr. Pike left first, saying he had a late supper at the village inn. Mrs. Warrender retired to her room, and Mr. Vance stayed in the hall, measuring for curtains. I locked the hall at 10 o'clock, as is my custom, and checked the windows and doors. All were secure. I retired to my quarters shortly after Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her gaze thoughtful. 10 o'clock, you say? And you saw nothing unusual? No strange sounds, no unexpected visitors? Nothing, ma'am, he said firmly, though his eyes flickered to the floor. The manor was quiet. I'd have heard if anyone was about. My room is just off the servants' hall, near the side door, Miss Marple repeated, her tone casual. That's the one used for deliveries, isn't it? Is it always locked at night? Mr. Clarence's posture stiffened slightly. Yes, ma'am. I check it myself. It was locked last night, I'm certain. Miss Marple smiled, her expression one of gentle reassurance. Of course. You're very thorough. I can see that. One last thing, Mr. Clarence. Did you handle the mirror yesterday? Perhaps to clean it? He shook his head, his voice steady. No, ma'am. I dusted the frame last week, but not yesterday. It was in perfect order when I locked the hall. Thank you, Mr. Clarence, Miss Marple said, her needles pausing as she tucked them into her bag. You've been most helpful. I shan't keep you from your work. He bowed slightly, his face a mask of professionalism, and returned to his polishing. Miss Marple stepped into the corridor, her mind turning over his words. Mr. Clarence's account was meticulous, almost too precise, as if rehearsed. His loyalty to the Ashfords was evident, but she had caught the faint tremor in his voice when he spoke of the mirror's value, and the brief glance to the floor when questioned about the side door. 30 years of service could breed devotion, but also familiarity, and familiarity could breed opportunity. As she made her way to the drawing room, Miss Marple reflected on the butler's life. She had known men like him in St. Mary Mead, steadfast, proud, but not immune to human frailties. She recalled old Mr. Hargreaves, the vicar's gardener, who had once taken a silver spoon from the vicarage, not for gain but because he felt it was owed to him after years of unnoticed toil. Mr. Clarence, she mused, might harbour no such petty resentment. But his debts, whispered about in the village, suggested a man under pressure. A failed investment Lady Beatrice had mentioned in passing had strained his finances. Could such a man, so trusted, be tempted by the mirror's worth? The drawing-room was empty, save for a young maid arranging flowers in a vase. Miss Marple paused by the window, her eyes tracing the manor's gardens, where the last roses clung to their stems. The side door, Mr. Clarence had said, was near his quarters. Convenient, she thought, for someone who knew the manor's rhythms. She made a mental note to inspect it later, along with the hall's windows. The smudge on the wall, the mirror's weight, the absence of forced entry, all pointed to someone within the manor, someone who moved with confidence in the dark. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the other suspects. Mrs. Warrender's vivacity, Mr. Vance's tools, Mr. Pike's obsession, each offered a thread to tug. But Mr. Clarence, with his access and his knowledge, was a thread that ran deep. She recalled a conversation with her nephew Raymond, who had once remarked that the most loyal servants often saw the most and hid the most. People, she murmured to herself, are never quite what they seem. She resolved to speak with the maid, who might have overheard something in the servants' hall. Young girls, Miss Marple knew, were often invisible to their betters, yet their ears caught whispers others missed. As she approached the maid, her smile was warm, her manner disarming. "My dear," she said, "I wonder if you might help me with a small matter. Did you happen to see Mr. Clarence last night, after the dinner?" The maid, a slight girl named Polly, blushed under Miss Marple's gaze. "Oh, ma'am, I was in the kitchen most of the evening washing up. But I did see Mr. Clarence when he came to check the side door. He was in a bit of a state, muttering about the guests keeping him late." "Was he now?" Miss Marple said, her tone light. "And did he mention the mirror at all?" Polly shook her head. "No, ma'am. but he did say something about Mr. Pike being too curious by half. I didn't think much of it at the time. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind cataloguing the detail. Mr. Clarence's irritation with Mr. Pike was a small piece, but pieces she knew built pictures. She returned to her knitting, her needles moving with purpose. The butler's tale was clear, but beneath its surface lay shadows. Shadows of debt, of opportunity, of a man who knew the manor's secrets better than anyone. She would watch Mr. Clarence closely, for in his precision she sensed a crack, however small, that might yet reveal the truth. As she stepped into the hall to examine the scene once more, Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of a puzzle taking shape. The mirror's absence was not just a theft, it was a story, and she was determined to read its ending. Chapter 3. The Guest's Account. The late morning light filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of Haverford Manor's drawing-room, casting a soft glow on the polished mahogany furniture and the delicate porcelain figurines that adorned the mantel. Miss Jane Marple sat in a cushioned armchair, her knitting bag resting on the floor beside her, the faint click of her needles a steady counterpoint to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. The manor's air carried a faint scent of lavender polish, but beneath it lingered the unease of the morning's discovery. The vanished Venetian mirror, a loss that seemed to echo in the very walls. Having spoken with Mr. Clarence, the butler, Miss Marple now turned her attention to Mrs. Evelyn Warrender, the vivacious widow whose presence at the manor had coincided with the theft. Mrs. Warrender entered the drawing-room with a rustle of silk, her emerald-green dress catching the light as she moved. She was a woman of perhaps 40, with auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon, and eyes that sparkled with a practised charm. Her smile, bright and welcoming, seemed to invite confidences, but Miss Marple, with her keen observation, noted the slight tension in her posture, the way her fingers toyed with the sapphire brooch pinned to her bodice. Mrs. Warrender settled onto a sofa, arranging her skirts with care, and leaned forward with an air of eager cooperation. "Miss Marple, how dreadful this business is!" she exclaimed, her voice rich with a theatrical warmth. "Poor Lady Beatrice, to lose such a treasure. I do hope I can be of some help, though I'm afraid I'm quite at a loss as to what happened." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. "You're very kind to assist, Mrs. Warrender," she said, her needles moving rhythmically. "I'm merely trying to understand the events of last night." "You were at the dinner, I believe, with Lady Beatrice and the others?" "Oh, yes," Mrs. Warrender replied, her hands fluttering briefly before settling in her lap. "Such a charming evening, or so it seemed. We dined in the hall, under that magnificent mirror. The pheasant was divine, and the conversation quite lively. I do love these country gatherings, so much more intimate than London affairs." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite interest. "And the mirror itself, did it come up in conversation?" Mrs. Warrender's laugh was light, almost musical. "Oh, how could it not? It's the sort of piece that demands attention. I said it reminded me of one I saw in a palazzo in Florence. Such intricate gilding. Mr. Pike, the collector, was quite taken with it, going on about its Venetian origins. Mr. Vance, the decorator, sketched it in his little book, muttering about proportions. Even Mr. Clarence, serving the wine, seemed to linger near it. I suppose we all admired it in our way. Miss Marple's needles paused for a moment, then resumed. And after dinner, what did you do? I retired to my room around 9:30. Mrs. Warrender said, her tone casual. I was reading a novel, nothing too taxing. I heard nothing unusual, no footsteps or strange noises. The manor was quite still. She paused, her fingers brushing the brooch again. I suppose I fell asleep by midnight. Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze lingering on the brooch. A fine piece, sapphires set in gold, likely costly. You've a lovely eye for beautiful things, Mrs. Warrender, she said. That brooch, for instance, an heirloom, perhaps. Mrs. Warrender's smile faltered, just for an instant. Oh, this? A gift from my late husband, she said quickly. He had a fondness for fine jewellery. I wear it to remember him. Her eyes darted to the side, and she shifted slightly on the sofa. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged. How thoughtful. And tell me, did you happen to pass through the hall again after dinner? Perhaps to admire the mirror one last time? No, Mrs. Warrender said, her voice a touch too emphatic. I went straight to my room. The hall was Mr. Vance's domain by then. He was measuring for curtains or some such. I prefer my books to late-night decorating. She laughed again, but it sounded forced, and her fingers tightened on the brooch. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her mind cataloguing the widow's words. Mrs. Warrender's charm was polished, but there was a brittleness to it, like a vase with a hidden crack. The brooch, the quick denial, the nervous glance. Small signs, but Miss Marple had learned to trust such subtleties. She recalled Mrs. Thompson, a visitor to St. Mary Mead some years ago, whose bright chatter had masked a penchant for pocketing silver spoons. Mrs. Warrender, with her expensive tastes and recent widowhood, might have needs that outstripped her means. You've been most helpful, Mrs. Warrender, Miss Marple said, her tone warm. Just one more thing. Did you notice anything about the other guests? Any odd behaviour, perhaps? Mrs. Warrender hesitated, her lips pursing slightly. Well, I suppose, Mr. Pike was rather intense about the mirror. He kept circling back to it, asking Lady Beatrice about its provenance. I thought it a bit obsessive, and Mr. Vance was so absorbed in his sketches, he barely joined the conversation. Mr. Clarence, though, was his usual self, silent, efficient, a perfect butler, really. Miss Marple smiled, tucking her knitting into her bag. Thank you, Mrs. Warrender. You've given me much to think about. She rose, her movements slow and deliberate, and excused herself, leaving the widow to her thoughts. As she stepped into the corridor, Miss Marple's mind turned over the conversation. Mrs. Warrender's account was smooth, but the cracks were there. Her nervousness, her vague timeline, her costly brooch. Lady Beatrice had mentioned in passing that Mrs. Warrender's visits to the manor often followed the sale of family heirlooms, a detail that suggested financial strain. Could such a woman, with her charm and her eye for beauty, have seen the mirror as a solution to her troubles? The hall's side door, so near the guest rooms, would have been a tempting route for someone bold enough to act. Miss Marple made her way to the hall, pausing to study the empty space where the mirror had hung. The smudge on the wall, faint but distinct, suggested a careful hand, perhaps gloved, as Mr. Clarence had implied. The mirror's weight would require strength or assistance, and Mrs. Warrender, though slight, was not frail. Miss Marple pictured her, silk dress rustling, slipping through the shadows with a purpose. Yet something nagged at her. The widow's quick dismissal of the hall after dinner, her insistence on staying in her room. It was too neat, too rehearsed. She decided to speak with the housemaid Polly again, who had been tidying the guest wing the previous evening. Miss Marple found her in the linen room, folding sheets with practised efficiency. "Polly, my dear," she said, her voice soft, "you mentioned seeing Mr. Clarence last night. Did you happen to notice Mrs. Warrender after dinner?" Polly's cheeks flushed, but she met Miss Marple's gaze. "I did, ma'am." She went to her room, like she said, but I saw her come out again, maybe 10 o'clock. She was in her dressing gown, said she was fetching a glass of water from the kitchen. I didn't think much of it, but she seemed in a hurry. Miss Marple's eyes brightened. "A hurry, you say?" "Did she go toward the kitchen, or elsewhere?" "Toward the hall, ma'am," Polly said, her voice low. "I was sweeping the corridor, so I saw her pass the side door. She didn't notice me," Miss Marple thanked her, her mind racing. Mrs. Warrender's account had omitted this late-night wander, a detail that cast her charm in a new light. The side door, so often unlocked for deliveries, was a stone's throw from the hall. Miss Marple recalled a similar case in St. Mary Mead, where a guest had claimed to be asleep while slipping out to meet a lover. Mrs. Warrender's motives were unclear, but her movements suggested more than a thirst for water. As she returned to the drawing-room to collect her thoughts, Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. Mrs. Warrender was a puzzle piece, bright and polished on the surface, but with edges that didn't quite fit. Her charm, her brooch, her late-night errand, all pointed to a woman with secrets. Miss Marple knew that secrets, like mirrors, reflected truths when viewed from the right angle. She would keep Mrs. Warrender in mind as she turned to the next suspect, her quiet determination as steady as the ticking clock. Chapter 4. The Decorator's Craft. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of Haverford Manor's library, casting long shadows across the shelves of leather-bound books, and the scattered swatches of fabric that littered a broad oak table. Miss Jane Marple stood at the threshold, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, her eyes taking in the scene with quiet precision. The library, with its air of scholarly calm, was an unlikely setting for a man like Mr. Hugo Vance, the decorator, whose flamboyant gestures and modern sensibilities seemed at odds with the manor's ancient dignity. Yet there he was, perched on a ladder, sketching furiously in a leather notebook, his wiry frame taut with concentration. The disappearance of the Venetian mirror had cast a pall over the manor, and Miss Marple, having spoken with Mr. Clarence and Mrs. Warrender, now sought to unravel the threads of Mr. Vance's role in the evening's mystery. She stepped forward, her footsteps soft on the Aubusson rug, and cleared her throat delicately. "Mr. Vance, might I have a word?" she asked, her voice carrying the gentle insistence of a village spinster accustomed to being heeded. Mr. Vance started, nearly dropping his pencil, and turned to face her. He was a man in his late 30s, with sharp features and dark hair slicked back in a manner that suggested both vanity and haste. His tweed jacket, though well cut, bore traces of chalk dust, and his tie was slightly askew, as if he had loosened it in a moment of frustration. "Miss Marple, is it?" he said, descending the ladder with a practised grace. "Lady Beatrice mentioned you'd be poking about." Dreadful business, that mirror. How can I assist? Miss Marple settled into a high-backed chair, her knitting needles emerging from her bag with their familiar click. "You're very kind to spare a moment," she said, her eyes bright behind her. "Spectacles. I understand you were working in the hall last night after the dinner. I'd like to hear your account of the evening, if you please." Mr. Vance leaned against the table, crossing his arms with a casual air that seemed just a touch too deliberate. "Of course," he said, his voice smooth but with a hint of wariness. "It was a pleasant enough evening. Lady Beatrice hosted a fine dinner, pheasant, good wine, the usual country charm. The mirror was the talk of the table, naturally. A stunning piece, that Venetian. I was sketching it for my notes, thinking how it would anchor the hall's new look." Miss Marple's needles moved steadily, her gaze fixed on him. "You're redesigning the hall, I believe." A bold task with such a historic space, he nodded, a flicker of pride crossing his face. "Indeed. Lady Beatrice wants a fresh aesthetic. New curtains, lighter colours, but keeping the manor's character. That mirror was to be the focal point. I spent the evening measuring the space, checking proportions. It's all about balance, you see." He gestured to a pile of fabric swatches, velvets and silks in muted greens and golds, stacked beside a small toolbox. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the toolbox, noting a crowbar nestled among screwdrivers and tape measures. "A heavy piece, that mirror," she remarked casually. "It must have been fixed securely to the wall. Did you inspect its mountings at all?" Mr. Vance's smile tightened, his fingers brushing the edge of the table. "No, I didn't touch it," he said quickly. "I admired it, sketched it, but my work was with the curtains. I was measuring the windows until about 11. Then I packed up and left for my room at the village inn." The mirror was still there, gleaming in the lamplight. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of mild curiosity. 11 o'clock, you say? And the hall was quiet when you left? No one else about?" "Not a soul," he replied, though his eyes flicked briefly to the door. Mr. Clarence had locked up earlier, and the guests had gone to their rooms. I saw Mrs. Warrender head upstairs and Mr. Pike had left for the inn before me. It was just me in the silence." Her needles paused just for a moment. "And your tools, Mr. Vance? Do you always carry such a sturdy crowbar? It looks rather robust for curtain work." He laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, that? It's useful for prying open crates of samples or adjusting old fixtures. This manor's full of stubborn woodwork, but I assure you, I had no need to touch the mirror's fixings." Miss Marple nodded, her smile unwavering. "Of course. You must have a keen eye for detail in your profession. Did you notice anything unusual about the other guests? Their behaviour, perhaps?" Mr. Vance hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "Well, Mrs. Warrender was her usual self, charming, a bit theatrical. She went on about the mirror as if she'd buy it herself if she could. Mr. Pike, though, he was intense, kept staring at the mirror, asking Lady Beatrice about its history. I thought he might try to haggle for it right there. Clarence was quiet, as always, but I caught him watching Pike closely, like he didn't trust him." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her mind cataloguing his words. Mr. Vance's account was confident, but there was a practised quality to it, as if he had anticipated her questions. The crowbar, so innocently explained, could easily have pried the mirror from its mountings. She recalled a decorator in St. Mary Mead, a Mr. Ellis, whose flair for design hid a knack for pilfering small antiques to fund his struggling business. Mr. Vance, with his scattered tools and quick answers, bore a similar air of calculated nonchalance. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Vance," she said, tucking her knitting away. "I shan't keep you from your work. Those curtains must be quite a project." He flashed a smile, though it seemed to cost him effort. "They are, Miss Marple. I'll be in the hall later, if you need me." He turned back to his sketches, but Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in his hand as he picked up his pencil. As she left the library, her thoughts turned to the hall. The smudge on the wall, the mirror's weight, the absence of forced entry, all suggested someone with access and opportunity. Mr. Vance, working late in the hall, had both. His crowbar was a troubling detail, and his quick dismissal of touching the mirror felt too pat. Lady Beatrice had mentioned in passing that Mr. Vance's decorating business was faltering, his commissions dwindling. A valuable antique, sold discreetly, could ease such troubles. Miss Marple decided to seek out Polly, the housemaid who had been cleaning the upper corridors the previous night. She found her in the servants' hall, polishing a brass tray. "Polly, my dear," Miss Marple said, her tone warm, "you've such a good memory. Did you see Mr. Vance last night, after the dinner?" Polly nodded, her eyes wide. "Yes, ma'am. He was in the hall, measuring the windows. I passed by around 10:30, fetching linens. He was muttering to himself, something about perfect lines. He had his toolbox open, and I saw that crowbar thing on the floor. He didn't notice me, though Miss Marple's smile was encouraging." "And did you see him leave the hall?" "Not exactly, ma'am," Polly said, her brow furrowing. "But I heard footsteps near the side door later, maybe 11. I thought it was Mr. Clarence checking the locks, but it could have been Mr. Vance. I was in the linen room by then." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind piecing together the fragments. Mr. Vance's presence in the hall, his tools, his financial strain, all painted a picture of possibility. The side door, so often left unlocked, was a mere step from the hall. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead where a painter, hired to restore a church fresco, had slipped a silver chalice into his satchel, claiming it was an accident. Mr. Vance's sketches and measurements might be genuine, but they could also be a cover for a more calculated act. As she made her way to the hall to inspect the scene once more, Miss Marple's needles clicked softly in her bag. Mr. Vance was a craftsman, skilled at creating illusions of beauty. But illusions, she knew, could hide truths as well as reveal them. She would watch him closely, for in his quick smiles and careful answers, she sensed a man who knew more than he said. Chapter 5. The Collector's Passion. The late afternoon light bathed the gardens of Haverford Manor in a soft amber glow, the manicured hedges and fading roses casting delicate shadows across the gravel paths. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl drawn tightly against the autumn chill, stepped out from the manor's side entrance, her knitting bag swinging gently at her side. The air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves, and the distant hum of village life felt far removed from the manor's troubled heart. The disappearance of the Venetian mirror had stirred a quiet unrest, and Miss Marple, having questioned Mr. Clarence, Mrs. Warrender, and Mr. Vance, now sought Mr. Roland Pike, the antique collector whose fervour for rare objects had not gone unnoticed. She found him pacing the rose garden, his gaunt figure moving with a restless energy, as if the open air could soothe the agitation that clung to him. Mr. Pike was a man in his early 50s, tall and lean, with a face that seemed carved from wax, pale, sharp, and intense. His dark coat hung loosely on his frame, and his eyes, deep-set and glittering, darted about as if searching for something unseen. When he saw Miss Marple approaching, he paused, his hands clasped behind his back, and offered a thin smile that held more courtesy than warmth. "Miss Marple, I presume," he said, his voice low and measured, with a hint of a rasp. "Lady Beatrice mentioned you'd be looking into this unfortunate affair. I'm happy to assist, though I fear I've little to offer." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes bright and unwavering behind her spectacles. "You're very kind, Mr. Pike," she said, settling onto a stone bench beneath a trellis of climbing roses. Her knitting needles emerged, their soft click a familiar rhythm as she began. "I understand you have a passion for antiques. The mirror must have been quite a sight for you last night." His eyes lit up, a flicker of something akin to hunger crossing his face. "Oh, it was extraordinary," he said, his voice warming. "A Venetian masterpiece, late 17th century, with arabesques that could only have come from a master craftsman's hand. The gilding, the clarity of the glass despite its age. It's a piece that belongs in a museum, not merely a manor hall." He caught himself, his expression tightening. "I mean no disrespect to Lady Beatrice, of course. It was magnificent where it hung." Miss Marple nodded, her needles moving steadily. "You spoke of it at dinner, I believe." "Lady Beatrice said you were quite taken with it." Mr. Pike's smile faltered, and he resumed pacing, his boots crunching on the gravel. "I suppose I was," he admitted. "I couldn't help it. I've spent my life seeking out such treasures, furniture, paintings, objects that carry history in their grain. I offered to buy the mirror, you know, a fair sum, though Lady Beatrice declined, quite firmly." His tone carried a trace of bitterness, quickly masked by a shrug. "Her prerogative, of course." Miss Marple's gaze followed his restless movements. "And after dinner, what did you do? I understand you left the manor early." He nodded, his hands tightening behind his back. "I left around 9, I'd say. I had a late supper at the village inn, the Black Swan. The landlord can confirm it. I was there until nearly 11, then retired to my room. I heard nothing of the mirror's theft until this morning." His voice was steady, but his eyes flicked toward the manor, as if drawn to the empty space where the mirror once hung. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of quiet curiosity. "The Black Swan is a cosy place, I hear. Did you speak with anyone there, perhaps about the mirror?" Mr. Pike hesitated, his fingers twitching. "Just the landlord, and a barmaid, I think. We talked of the weather, the village, nothing of consequence. The mirror, well, I may have mentioned its beauty, but only in passing." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "You don't think I had anything to do with this, do you?" "I'm a collector, Miss Marple, not a thief." Her smile was reassuring, though her eyes missed nothing. "Of course, Mr. Pike, I'm merely trying to understand the evening. You have such knowledge of antiques. Did you notice anything about the mirror's frame, perhaps its fixings? Anything that might suggest how it was removed?" He shook his head. but his eyes lingered on her, as if weighing her intent. The frame was heavy, solid oak beneath the gilding. It would have taken strength to move it and care to avoid damage. The fixings were old but sturdy, bolts I'd wager, not mere hooks. Whoever took it knew what they were doing. His voice held a note of admiration, quickly suppressed. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind cataloguing his words. "You've a sharp eye, Mr. Pike. Did you notice anything unusual among the other guests? Their behaviour, perhaps?" He stopped pacing, his lips pursing. "Mrs. Warrender was her usual charming self, though I thought her interest in the mirror a bit performative. Mr. Vance was absorbed in his sketches, barely speaking. Clarence, the butler, was watchful, especially when I spoke of the mirror. I got the sense he didn't trust me." He gave a dry laugh. "Collectors often get that look." Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Thank you, Mr. Pike. You've been most helpful. I shan't keep you from your walk." He inclined his head, his expression unreadable, and resumed his pacing as Miss Marple made her way back toward the manor. Her thoughts turned over his words, his intensity, his knowledge of the mirror's construction. Mr. Pike's passion was palpable, almost feverish, and she recalled a case in St. Mary Mead where a bibliophile had stolen a rare manuscript, not for profit, but for the sheer joy of possession. Mr. Pike, with his obsessive gleam, might well harbour such a desire. His alibi at the inn was convenient, but the timing left room for a return to the manor under cover of darkness. She paused by the side door, its weathered wood unassuming yet significant. Polly, the housemaid, had mentioned footsteps near it after 11, and Mr. Pike's room at the inn was a short walk from the manor. Miss Marple pictured him, driven by his collector's zeal, slipping back to the hall with a tool to pry the mirror free. The smudge on the wall, the careful removal, his description of the frame's weight and fixings suggested a familiarity that went beyond casual observation. Seeking confirmation, Miss Marple sought out the landlord of the Black Swan, Mr. Harrow, a stout man with a cheerful demeanour. She found him wiping down the bar, the inn quiet in the afternoon lull. "Mr. Harrow," she said, her tone disarming, "I understand Mr. Pike was here last night. Can you tell me when he arrived and left?" Mr. Harrow nodded, his hands pausing on the cloth. "Aye, Miss Marple. Mr. Pike came in around 9, had a bit of supper, cold beef and ale. He was here till about 10:30, maybe a touch later. Seemed restless, kept checking his watch. Said he was tired and went up to his room." Miss Marple's smile was appreciative. "Did he mention the mirror at Haverford Manor?" "He's quite fond of antiques, I hear." "He did, ma'am," Mr. Harrow said, scratching his chin. "Talked about its gilding, how it was a shame it wasn't in a gallery. Sounded like he'd have given his right arm for it. Bit intense, if you ask me." Miss Marple thanked him and stepped back into the village street, her mind weaving connections. Mr. Pike's obsession was a thread that ran deep, his alibi solid but not airtight. The manor's side door, so near the hall, offered a discreet exit for a man driven by passion. She recalled Lady Beatrice's remark that Mr. Pike's collection included pieces of questionable provenance, a whisper of unscrupulous dealings. Could his desire for the mirror have overridden his scruples? As she returned to the manor, her needles clicked softly in her bag. Mr. Pike was a man consumed by beauty. But beauty, Miss Marple knew, could be a dangerous muse. His knowledge, his restlessness, his late-night presence at the inn, all pointed to a man who might act on impulse. She would keep him in her sights as she moved to the next piece of the puzzle, her quiet resolve as steady as the fading light. Chapter 6. The Scene of the Crime. The twilight settled over Haverford Manor like a soft veil, the last rays of the sun gilding the stone walls and casting long shadows across the grand hall. Miss Jane Marple stood alone in the cavernous space, her knitting bag resting on a nearby table, her eyes scanning the oak-panelled wall where the Venetian mirror had hung. The absence of the mirror left the hall feeling oddly unbalanced, as if a vital organ had been plucked from the manor's heart. The smudge on the wall, faint and irregular, was the only clue to the thief's presence, and Miss Marple, having gathered the accounts of Mr. Clarence, Mrs. Warrender, Mr. Vance, and Mr. Pike, now turned her attention to the scene itself, trusting that the silent evidence might speak where words had faltered. She stepped closer to the wall, her movements deliberate, her spectacles glinting in the dim light of a single chandelier. The smudge was higher than her reach, suggesting a tall figure or one standing on a stool. It was not the mark of a careless hand, but rather a controlled one, perhaps gloved, as the edges were blurred, lacking the sharp ridges of fingerprints. Miss Marple tilted her head, her mind conjuring the act of removal. The mirror, heavy with its oak-backed frame, would have required strength and precision to dislodge without damage. The bolts securing it to the wall were intact, their heads polished by years of cleaning, but a faint scuff on one suggested a tool, a wrench perhaps, or a crowbar like the one in Mr. Vance's toolbox. She knelt, her knees protesting slightly, to examine the floor. The polished oak bore a single scratch, thin and shallow, running from the wall toward the side door. It was not deep enough to suggest the mirror had been dragged, but rather as if something heavy had brushed the surface. A crate, perhaps, or the edge of the mirror itself, carefully manoeuvred. Miss Marple followed the scratch's path, her eyes tracing its arc to the side door, a sturdy panel of oak often left unlocked for deliveries, as Mr. Clarence had confirmed. She pushed the door open, noting its silent hinges, and stepped into the cool evening air. The gravel path outside was undisturbed, but a faint indentation, barely visible in the fading light, hinted at the passage of a wheel. A cart, perhaps, or a barrow. Returning to the hall, Miss Marple surveyed the room's other features. The tall windows, framed in lead, were latched tightly, their locks unmarred by scratches or force. The main door, heavy with iron fittings, showed no signs of tampering. The theft, she concluded, was an inside job, executed by someone familiar with the manor's rhythms. The side door's proximity to the hall and its lax security made it the likely exit, but the mirror's weight, easily 50 pounds, she estimated, suggested either a strong individual or an accomplice. Her thoughts flickered to Mr. Clarence's meticulous nature, Mrs. Warrender's late-night wander, Mr. Vance's crowbar, and Mr. Pike's obsession. Each could have navigated the hall in darkness, but who had the motive and the means? Miss Marple retrieved her knitting bag and sat in a high-backed chair, her needles clicking softly as she considered the evidence. The hall was a stage, and the thief had played their part with care, leaving only the smudge and the scratch as clues. She recalled a theft in St. Mary Mead, where a silver teapot vanished from the vicarage, taken by a choir boy who knew the back door was never locked. The principle was the same: opportunity born of familiarity. Someone in the manor or with access to it had seized their moment. She rose and approached the side door again, this time examining its lock. It was a simple bolt, easily drawn from the inside, and the key, kept on a hook in the servants' hall, was present but slightly askew, as if recently handled. Miss Marple made a mental note to ask Polly, the housemaid, if she had noticed anyone near the door after hours. She stepped outside once more, her eyes scanning the path for further clues. The indentation in the gravel was faint, but a small patch of mud nearby bore the imprint of a boot, broad, with a worn heel, suggesting a man's shoe. It was not definitive, but it narrowed the possibilities. Returning to the manor, Miss Marple sought out Polly, who was polishing silver in the servants' hall. The girl looked up, her cheeks flushing under Miss Marple's gentle gaze. "Polly, my dear," Miss Marple said, her tone warm, "you've been so helpful already. Can you tell me about the side door last night? Did you see anyone near it after the dinner?" Polly's hands paused on the silver tray, her brow furrowing. "I didn't see anyone, ma'am, but I heard the bolt slide, maybe around 11. I was in the linen room, folding sheets. I thought it was Mr. Clarence, checking the locks, but I didn't look. It was just a quick sound, then nothing." Miss Marple's eyes brightened. "And the key, Polly, did you notice it on its hook?" Polly nodded slowly. "It was there this morning, ma'am, but it looked a bit off, like someone had moved it." I didn't think much of it till now. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind weaving the new details into the tapestry of the case. The bolt's slide, the key's misalignment, the boot print, all pointed to a calculated act, executed in the quiet hours when the manor slept. She recalled Mr. Vance's late-night measuring, Mrs. Warrender's trip for water, and Mr. Pike's departure to the inn, which left a window for his return. Mr. Clarence, with his room near the side door, could have moved unnoticed. Each suspect had opportunity, but the physical evidence suggested a man's strength, narrowing her focus to Clarence, Vance, or Pike. Returned to the hall, her needles clicking as she sat by the fireplace, its embers casting a faint warmth. The smudge, the scratch, the boot print, they were fragments of a story, and Miss Marple was adept at reading such tales. The thief had known the manor's weaknesses, exploiting the side door's laxity. She thought of Lady Beatrice's distress, the mirror's significance to the Ashford legacy. The theft was not just a loss of wealth, but a violation of trust, and Miss Marple felt a quiet resolve to restore order. As she rose to join Lady Beatrice for tea, her thoughts lingered on the suspects. Mr. Clarence's debts, Mrs. Warrender's financial strain, Mr. Vance's faltering business, Mr. Pike's obsession. Each was a motive, but the scene whispered of careful planning, not impulse. The hall, with its silent clues, had given her a starting point, and Miss Marple knew that the truth, like a well-knit pattern, would emerge with patience. She tucked her knitting away, her eyes sharp with purpose, ready to unravel the next thread in the manor's mystery. Next, Chapter 7, Whispers of Motive. The evening shadows deepened within Haverford Manor, the grand hall now lit by the soft flicker of oil lamps that cast a warm, wavering glow across the oak-panelled walls. The absence of the Venetian mirror left the space feeling hollow, its once proud centrepiece reduced to a smudge and a memory. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag at her side, sat in a private sitting room with Lady Beatrice Ashford, the fire crackling in the grate as they shared a pot of Earl Grey. The tea was fragrant, the porcelain cups delicate, but the air held a tension that no amount of civility could dispel. Miss Marple, having examined the scene of the crime and questioned Mr. Clarence, Mrs. Warrender, Mr. Vance, and Mr. Pike, now sought to probe deeper into the motives that might have driven one of them to steal the manor's treasure. Lady Beatrice, her face etched with worry, was a willing confidant. Her knowledge of her guests a key to unlocking the puzzle. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes gentle but piercing behind her spectacles. "Beatrice, my dear," she said, her voice soft as the click of her knitting needles. "You've known these people for some time. Tell me about them. Not just last night, but their lives, their circumstances. Sometimes the smallest detail can shine a light on the truth." Lady Beatrice set her cup down, her hands twisting the lace handkerchief in her lap. "I hardly know where to begin, Jane," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "This theft has shaken me. To think one of them could betray my trust. It's unthinkable, yet here we are." She took a steadying breath, her eyes meeting Miss Marple's. "Very well. Let's start with Mr. Clarence. He's been with us for 30 years, ever since my husband's father was master here. He's loyal to a fault, always proper, always discreet, but I've heard whispers in the village he made a poor investment some years ago, a shipping venture that failed. He's been struggling to repay it, though he'd never admit it." Miss Marple's needles moved rhythmically, her mind cataloguing the detail. "A man of pride, then," she murmured. "Debts can weigh heavily, even on the most steadfast. And Mrs. Warrender? She's a recent guest, I understand." Lady Beatrice nodded, her lips pursing. "Evelyn arrived a fortnight ago, on one of her impromptu visits. She's a widow, you know, left with a modest income after her husband's death. She's charming, always full of stories about her travels, but I've noticed her visits often follow the sale of some family heirloom. A painting, a necklace. She lives well, Jane, perhaps too well for her means. That sapphire brooch she wears, it's new and costly. I wonder where she finds the money." Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest, though her expression remained placid. "A woman of expensive tastes," she said. "Such habits can lead to creative solutions. And Mr. Vance, the decorator? He's been here for the renovations, I presume." "Yes," Lady Beatrice replied, her tone cooling. "Hugo was recommended by a friend in London. He's talented, no question, but his business is struggling. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he's lost several clients. Something about unpaid bills and rushed work. He's been anxious to please me, perhaps too much so. The mirror was to be the centerpiece of his design for the hall. He spoke of it constantly, sketching it, measuring it. I thought it was professional zeal, but now—" Her voice trailed off, her eyes darkening. Miss Marple's needles paused for a moment, then resumed. "A man under pressure might see opportunity in a valuable antique," she said softly. "And Mr. Pike, the collector? His interest in the mirror was quite pronounced, you said." Lady Beatrice's face tightened. "Roland Pike is a strange man, Jane. He's wealthy, or so he claims, with a collection of antiques that rivals a museum's. But there are rumours, nothing proven, mind you, that some of his acquisitions were less than legitimate. He came to Haverford specifically to see the mirror, invited himself, really. He offered me a fortune for it, more than I could have imagined. But it's not about money. The mirror is part of this house, part of my family. He seemed to understand, but his eyes, there was a hunger in them, Jane. It unnerved me. Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving the threads of motive into a pattern. A collector's passion can be a powerful force, she said. I've known men in Saint. Mary Mead, who would go to great lengths for a rare book or a piece of porcelain. Desire can cloud judgment. She set her knitting aside, her hands folding neatly in her lap. Tell me, Beatrice, were there any tensions among them last night? Any words or glances that struck you? Lady Beatrice frowned, her fingers tightening on the handkerchief. Nothing overt, but now that you ask, Evelyn, Mrs. Warrender, was perhaps too attentive to Mr. Pike, laughing at his stories, touching his arm. I thought it her usual flirtation, but Mr. Clarence seemed to disapprove. He kept his distance, but I caught him watching her, his face like stone. Mr. Vance was quieter than usual, focused on his sketches. But he snapped at Pike once, when Pike suggested the mirror would look better in a gallery. And Pike himself, he was polite, but there was an edge to him, especially when I refused his offer. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, her mind sifting through the nuances. A delicate balance, these gatherings, she said. People reveal so much in their silences. She sipped her tea, her thoughts turning to the hall, the smudge, the scratch, the boot print by the side door. Each suspect had a motive. Clarence's debts, Warrender's extravagance, Vance's financial woes, Pike's obsession, and each had been in the hall, with access to the side door. The motives were clear, but the act required opportunity and nerve. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a widow's maid had sold a family brooch to pay for her brother's debts, claiming it was lost. Motives, Miss Marple knew, were like roots, hidden but feeding the actions above. Mr. Clarence's loyalty might mask desperation. Mrs. Warrender's charm might conceal calculation. Mr. Vance's artistry might hide opportunism. Mr. Pike's passion might drive him to theft. The hall's silent clues pointed to an inside job, and the motives she had uncovered gave her a map to follow. Beatrice, she said, her voice gentle, you've given me much to consider. I think I shall take a walk to the village tomorrow to clear my thoughts. Sometimes a bit of distance brings clarity. She smiled, her needles clicking once more. And the servants, might I speak with them again? They see so much, you know, without being seen. Lady Beatrice nodded, her expression softening. Of course, Jane. The staff adore you. Polly, in particular. She's young but observant. I'll arrange it. She hesitated, her eyes searching Miss Marple's face. Do you think we'll find the mirror, Jane? I feel as if the manor's soul has been wounded. Miss Marple's smile was reassuring, though her eyes held a quiet determination. We shall do our best, my dear. Things have a way of revealing themselves. Given time, she rose, her knitting tucked away, and excused herself, leaving Lady Beatrice to the comfort of the fire. As she stepped into the corridor, Miss Marple's mind was alight with possibilities. The motives were like pieces of a quilt, each distinct but part of a larger pattern. She thought of the side door, the boot print, the careful removal of the mirror. Someone had acted with purpose, exploiting the manor's trust. She resolved to visit the village in the morning, to seek out whispers that might confirm or challenge what she had learned. The grocer, the innkeeper, the maids, they saw the undercurrents of life, the small truths that the grand hall concealed. Miss Marple knew that motives like shadows grew clearer in the light of others' eyes, and she was determined to find that light. Chapter 8. A Village Clue. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, draping the village in a silvery veil that softened the outlines of its thatched cottages and cobblestone lanes. Miss Jane Marple, her black shawl snug against the autumn chill, walked with measured steps along the path from Haverford Manor to the village centre. Her knitting bag swung gently at her side, its contents a quiet comfort, as her mind sifted through the threads of the missing Venetian mirror. The interviews with Mr. Clarence, Mrs. Warrender, Mr. Vance, and Mr. Pike, combined with Lady Beatrice's insights into their motives, had painted a vivid picture of greed, desperation, and obsession. Yet the physical clues, the smudge, the scratch, the boot print, demanded context, and Miss Marple knew that villages, with their watchful eyes and wagging tongues, often held the keys to such mysteries. She aimed to gather the whispers that might illuminate the shadows of Haverford Manor. Her first stop was the Black Swan, the village inn where Mr. Pike had claimed to spend the evening after leaving the manor. The inn's low-beamed ceiling and worn oak tables exuded a cosy warmth, though the morning quiet was broken only by the clink of glasses as Mr. Harrow, the landlord, prepared for the day. He greeted Miss Marple with a nod, his ruddy face breaking into a smile as he recognized the village's unassuming sleuth. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Heard about the trouble up at the manor? That mirror business, shocking, ain't it? What brings you here?" Miss Marple's smile was disarming, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. "Just a bit of fresh air, Mr. Harrow, and a chance to clear my thoughts. You mentioned Mr. Pike was here last night. Could you tell me a bit more? He's such an interesting man, with his antiques." Mr. Harrow leaned on the bar, his expression thoughtful. "Aye, he was here, right enough. Came in around 9, had a plate of cold beef and a pint. Sat by the fire, quiet-like, but he was fidgety, kept checking his watch, muttering to himself. Said something about the manor's mirror, how it was wasted on a wall. I thought he was just keen on it, being a collector, but he seemed distracted. Left about 10:30. Said he was turning in Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her bag, seemed to itch for movement." "Distracted, you say? Did he speak with anyone else? Perhaps the barmaid?" Mr. Harrow nodded. "Aye, Jenny was serving. She might have heard more. She's out back, fetching firewood." He called for Jenny, a young woman with bright eyes and a quick hooah step, who appeared with an armful of logs. She curtsied awkwardly to Miss Marple, her cheeks flushing. "Jenny, my dear," Miss Marple said, her tone warm. "Mr.?" "Harrow," says Mr. "Pike was here last night. Did you notice anything about him? Anything he said or did?" Jenny set the logs down, wiping her hands on her apron. "He was odd, ma'am," she said, her voice low. "Kept staring at his watch, like he was waiting for something. He asked me if I'd ever seen the manor's mirror, said it was a work of art. I told him I'd only seen it once when I helped with a delivery. He got this look, intense-like. Said it belonged in a collection, not a dusty hall. When he left, he was in a hurry, coat pulled tight, like he didn't want to be seen." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with interest. "Thank you, Jenny. You've a good memory." She turned to Mr. Harrow. "And did you see anyone else from the manor that night? Mr. Vance, perhaps? Or Mrs. Warrender?" Mr. Harrow shook his head. "Just Mr. Pike, ma'am. Mr. Vance came in earlier, before dinner, for a quick pint, but he was back at the manor by 7. Mrs. Warrender don't come here. She's too grand for the likes of us." Miss Marple thanked them and stepped back into the street, her mind turning over Jenny's words. Mr. Pike's intensity, his hurried departure, his talk of the mirror belonging in a collection, it all pointed to a man consumed by desire. His alibi held, but the inn was a mere 10-minute walk from the manor, leaving ample time for a return under cover of darkness. The side door, with its loose bolt, would have been a tempting exit. Her next stop was the village grocer, Mr. Tuttle, whose shop was a hub of gossip as much as goods. The bell above the door jangled as she entered, the air thick with the scent of fresh bread and dried herbs. Mr. Tuttle, a wiry man with a knack for remembering faces, greeted her with a nod. "Miss Marple, always a pleasure. Come about the manor's trouble, I reckon?" She smiled, her manner unhurried. "You hear everything, Mr. Tuttle, I'm curious about last night. Did you or anyone see anything unusual near Haverford Manor? A cart, perhaps, or someone out late?" Mr. Tuttle's eyes lit up, eager to share. "Funny you should ask, ma'am. My boy Tom was out late, delivering flour to the vicarage. Around midnight, he saw a covered cart by the manor's side gate. Not the main drive, mind, but the path by the old stables. It was dark, but he saw a figure in a coat, moving quick-like. Couldn't see the face, but the cart was gone by the time he came back through." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. "A covered cart, you say? That's most interesting. Did Tom notice anything else? Perhaps the direction it went?" "Toward the North Road, ma'am," Mr. Tuttle said. "Leads to the city eventually." Tom thought it odd, that time of night, but he didn't stop to look closer. Said the figure was tall, maybe a man, but it was too dark to be sure. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. A covered cart at midnight, near the side door, suggested a planned theft, not a spur-of-the-moment act. The North Road led to the city, where Mr. Pike was known to maintain a private vault for his collection. She recalled his feverish eyes, his detailed knowledge of the mirror's frame. Could he have arranged for a cart to spirit the mirror away, exploiting the manor's lax security? Her final stop was the post office, where Miss Clara, the postmistress, presided over letters and rumours with equal diligence. Miss Clara, a sharp-eyed woman with a penchant for detail, was sorting mail when Miss Marple entered. "Miss Marple!" she exclaimed. "I heard about the mirror. What a scandal! Have you any leads?" Miss Marple's smile was modest. "I'm only asking questions, Clara. You see so much from your window. Did you notice anything odd last night, near the manor or the village?" Miss Clara leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I did, as it happens. I was up late, balancing the books, when I saw a light moving near the manor's side gate, around 11:30, I'd say. Not a lantern, more like a torch, bobbing along. I thought it was a poacher at first, but it was too close to the manor. Then I heard a cart creak, heading north. I couldn't see who was driving, but it wasn't one of our local carts. Too big, too quiet." Miss Marple's needles, still in her bag, seemed to pulse with anticipation. "A torch and a cart," she murmured, "most curious. Did you see anyone else about? Mr. Clarence, perhaps, or Mrs. Warrender?" Miss Clara shook her head. "Not them, ma'am." "But I did see Mr. Vance earlier, walking back from the inn around 7. And Mr. Pike, he posted a letter here yesterday afternoon, addressed to a dealer in the city. Seemed in a rush, didn't stop to chat." Miss Marple thanked her and stepped into the street, the mist now lifting to reveal the village in crisp clarity. The clues were mounting. A cart at midnight, a torch by the side gate, Mr. Pike's letter to a dealer. Each pointed to a calculated plan, and Mr. Pike's obsession made him a compelling figure. Yet Mrs. Warrender's late-night wander, Mr. Vance's crowbar, and Mr. Clarence's proximity to the side door kept them in the frame. The village had given her fragments, and Miss Marple knew that fragments, when pieced together, could form a picture as clear as the missing mirror's glass. As she walked back to the manor, her thoughts turned to the next step. The cart's path to the north suggested a destination, perhaps Mr. Pike's city vault, but she needed more to confront him. She resolved to examine the side gate herself, to seek any trace of the cart or its driver. The village had whispered its secrets, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was ready to listen further. Her mind as sharp as the needles in her bag. Chapter 9. The Hidden Truth. The late afternoon light filtered through the leaded windows of Haverford Manor, casting a mosaic of shadows across the polished floors of the private sitting room where Miss Jane Marple now sat. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax and the faint smoke of the dying fire, a reminder of the manor's quiet dignity despite its recent wound. The Venetian mirror's absence had left a void, both physical and emotional, and Miss Marple, with her knitting bag at her feet, felt the weight of the puzzle pressing upon her. Her inquiries in the village had yielded vital clues. A covered cart at midnight, a torch by the side gate, Mr. Pike's letter to a city dealer, and now, armed with these fragments, she resolved to test the suspects' reactions, to stir the still waters of their carefully crafted stories. She requested Lady Beatrice to arrange private meetings with each suspect, sensing that the truth, like a shy creature, might emerge under gentle pressure. Miss Marple began with Mr. Clarence, summoning him to the sitting room under the pretext of clarifying the manor's routines. He entered with his usual decorum, his black coat immaculate, his grey eyes guarded but polite. She offered him a seat, her knitting needles clicking softly as she spoke. "Mr. Clarence," she said, her voice mild, "I've been thinking about that side door. You mentioned it was locked last night, but I heard from Polly that the bolt slid around 11. Could someone have used it without your knowledge?" His posture stiffened, his hands clasping tightly behind his back. "Impossible, Miss Marple," he said, his tone firm, but with a faint tremor. "I checked the bolt myself at 10. If it was moved later, it wasn't by me. Perhaps one of the maids was careless." His eyes flicked to the floor, a gesture Miss Marple noted as she mentioned the cart seen near the side gate. "A cart?" he repeated, his brow furrowing. "I heard nothing of it." "My room is close, but I was asleep by then." His voice was steady, yet the mention of the cart seemed to unsettle him, his fingers twitching slightly. Thanking him, Miss Marple moved on to Mrs. Warrender, who swept into the room with a rustle of silk, her sapphire brooch catching the light. Her smile was bright, but her eyes darted nervously as Miss Marple recounted the village whispers. A cart, a torch, the side door's bolt. "Mrs. Warrender," she said, her needles pausing. "You mentioned fetching water around 10. Polly saw you near the hall. Did you notice anything unusual, perhaps by the side door?" Mrs. Warrender's laugh was high and brittle, her fingers brushing the brooch. "Oh, Miss Marple, I was half asleep stumbling about for a glass of water. I didn't go near the side door. I saw nothing, I swear." Her words tumbled out too quickly, and her gaze slid to the window, avoiding Miss Marple's steady eyes. The mention of the cart made her flush, her hand tightening on the brooch as she murmured, "A cart! How strange! I heard nothing of it." Next came Mr. Vance, his wiry frame tense as he perched on the edge of a chair. His tweed jacket was dusted with chalk, and his fingers toyed with a pencil as Miss Marple spoke of the torch and the cart. "Mr. Vance," she said, her tone conversational, "you were in the hall until 11, measuring for curtains. Did you see anyone near the side door, or perhaps hear a cart outside?" His eyes narrowed, his hand stilling on the pencil. "No, Miss Marple," he said, his voice clipped. "I was focused on my work." The hall was quiet, and I left through the main door to the inn. A cart? I wouldn't know. His gaze flicked to the door, and his foot tapped restlessly, a sign Miss Marple tucked away. Finally, she met Mr. Pike in the garden, where the fading roses seemed to mirror his gaunt, restless demeanour. His dark coat was buttoned tightly, his eyes glittering as Miss Marple recounted the village clues. "Mr. Pike," she said, her needles moving slowly. "A cart was seen by the side gate at midnight, heading north toward the city, where you keep your collection. And you posted a letter to a dealer yesterday. Curious, don't you think?" His face paled, his fingers gripping the arm of the bench. "A coincidence," he said, his voice low and strained. "I was at the inn, as I told you." "My letter was about a clock, not the mirror. I'm no thief, Miss Marple." His stammered denial and the sweat on his brow betrayed a deeper unease. Miss Marple then spoke casually of the mirror's frame, its unique arabesques etched with a tiny fleur-de-lis, visible only up close. "You described it so vividly at dinner," she said, watching him. "Such detail suggests a careful study." Mr. Pike's eyes widened, his voice faltering as he muttered, I admire quality, that's all." His knowledge of the frame's intricacies, unprompted by her earlier questions, was a slip she noted with care. As she dismissed him, Miss Marple's mind wove the reactions together. Mr. Clarence's tremor, Mrs. Warrender's nervous laugh, Mr. Vance's restless foot, Mr. Pike's pallor. Each was a thread in the tapestry of guilt. The cart, the torch, the side door's bolt pointed to a planned theft. And Mr. Pike's reaction, coupled with his obsession and city connections, made him stand out. Yet the other's unease suggested they too held secrets. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a nervous glance had led her to a pilfered cameo, hidden by a guest who feigned innocence. Here, the mirror's weight and the cart's presence suggested an accomplice, but Mr. Pike's slip about the frame was a beacon. Miss Marple requested Lady Beatrice to host a final gathering that evening, sensing the moment to press for the truth was near. She returned to the hall, her eyes lingering on the smudge, the scratch, the path to the side. Doctor the village clues had tightened the net, and Mr. Pike's reaction had drawn it closer. She knew that truth, like a shy bird, required a gentle trap, and she was ready to set it, her needles clicking with quiet purpose as the manor prepared for the night's reckoning. Chapter 10. The gathering. The grand hall of Haverford Manor was bathed in the soft glow of chandeliers, their crystal prisms scattering light across the oak-panelled walls, where the absence of the Venetian mirror left a stark, accusing void. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and the faint tang of wax, but an undercurrent of tension pulsed beneath the manor's stately calm. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, her knitting bag at her feet, surveyed the assembled company with a serene yet piercing gaze. Lady Beatrice Ashford, pale but composed, sat at the head of the long table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Around her were the suspects, Mr. Clarence, rigid in his butler's blacks, Mrs. Warrender, her silk dress shimmering but her smile strained, Mr. Vance, his fingers tapping nervously on his sketchbook, and Mr. Pike, his gaunt face taut, his eyes darting to the empty wall. Miss Marple had requested this gathering, sensing that the threads of the mystery, woven from village clues, physical evidence, and the suspect's own reactions, were ready to be drawn tight. She began with a gentle cough, her knitting needles clicking softly as she spoke, her voice carrying the quiet authority of one who sees beyond the surface. "Lady Beatrice has asked me to look into the matter of the missing mirror," she said, her eyes moving from face to face. "A treasure such as that does not vanish without purpose, and I believe the truth lies here, among us. Let us consider the facts." She paused, letting the silence settle, noting the subtle shifts in posture. "Mr." Clarence's clasped hands tightening, Mrs. Warrender's fingers brushing her sapphire brooch, Mr. Vance's foot stilling abruptly, Mr. Pike's jaw clenching. "The mirror," she continued, "was heavy, secured by sturdy bolts, removed with care to leave only a smudge and a scratch. The side door, often unlocked for deliveries, was the likely exit. As a cart was seen near the manor's side gate at midnight, heading north, a torch flickered by the gate, and the door's bolt was heard to slide around 11. These are not the marks of a stranger, but of someone who knew the manor's ways. Mrs. Warrender let out a small, nervous laugh, quickly stifled. "Surely, Miss Marple, you don't think one of us—" Her voice trailed off as Miss Marple's gaze met hers, calm but unyielding. "I think," Miss Marple said, "that each of you had opportunity. Mr. Clarence, you locked the hall at 10 but were near the side door, where the bolt was moved. Mrs. Warrender, you were seen near the hall at 10 fetching water. You said, though you omitted this from your account. Mr. Vance, you worked in the hall until 11, with a crowbar in your toolbox that could have pried the mirror free. And Mr. Pike, you left for the inn at 9 but were restless, speaking of the mirror as if it belonged in your collection." Mr. Pike's face flushed, his voice sharp. "I was at the Black Swan, Miss Marple, as the landlord confirmed." "I had no part in this." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes fixed on him. "Indeed, Mr. Pike, you were at the inn until 10:30. But the manor is a short walk away, and a cart was seen at midnight, heading towards the city, where you keep a private vault for your collection. You posted a letter to a dealer yesterday, and you spoke of the mirror's frame, its fleur-de-lis etching, with a precision that suggests more than a passing glance." His hands gripped the table's edge, his knuckles whitening. "I admired it, yes, but I didn't steal it. My letter was about a clock, not the mirror. You've no proof." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, almost pitying. "Proof is a curious thing, Mr. Pike. It lies in the small details. Your knowledge of the frame, your restlessness at the inn, the cart's path north. You returned to the manor after your supper, didn't you? You knew the side door was often unchecked, and you had the means to move the mirror, perhaps with a hired carter to transport it to your vault, where you could admire it in secret. The room was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Mr. Clarence's face was a mask, Mrs. Warrender's eyes wide, Mr. Vance's fingers frozen on his sketchbook. Mr. Pike's breath came in short gasps, his gaze darting to Lady Beatrice, then back to Miss Marple. "This is absurd," he stammered. "I'm a collector, not a criminal." "I offered to buy it fairly." Miss Marple's voice remained calm, her needles resuming their rhythm. "And when Lady Beatrice refused, your passion overcame your scruples. The mirror's weight required planning, a cart, a quiet exit. The smudge was from your gloved hand, the scratch from your careful handling. You couldn't resist its beauty, could you?" Mr. Pike's face crumpled, his shoulders sagging. I only wanted to preserve it," he whispered, his voice breaking. The admission hung in the air, a confession wrung from a man undone by his own obsession. Mrs. Warrender gasped. Mr. Vance exhaled sharply, and Mr. Clarence's eyes narrowed, though he said nothing. Lady Beatrice's hand rose to her throat, her expression a mix of shock and sorrow. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her gaze steady. "Greed takes many forms, Mr. Pike. Yours was a greed for beauty, but it led you to betray a friend's trust. The police will need to know where the mirror is hidden." Mr. Pike nodded, his voice barely audible. "It's in my vault, in the city." "I meant to keep it safe, to cherish it. I'm sorry, Lady Beatrice." His words were a plea, but the damage was done. Miss Marple leaned back, her work complete for now. The hall with its empty wall seemed to breathe again, the truth a small restoration of its dignity. She knew the police would handle the rest, but her task was to uncover the heart of the matter, and she had done so with the quiet precision of her needles. Chapter 11. The Confession. The grand hall of Haverford Manor, still bathed in the chandelier's soft glow, seemed to hold its breath, as Mr. Roland Pike's confession hung in the air. The weight of his words, faltering yet undeniable, settled over the assembled company like a chill mist. Lady Beatrice Ashford, her face pale but resolute, sat rigidly at the head of the table, her eyes fixed on the collector whose betrayal had wounded her home. Mr. Clarence stood by the door, his butler's composure a thin veneer over a flicker of disdain. Mrs. Warrender's hand hovered near her sapphire brooch, her lips parted in shock, while Mr. Vance's fingers tightened on his sketchbook, his expression a mix of relief and unease. Miss Jane Marple, seated quietly with her knitting bag at her feet, observed them all, her serene demeanour masking the sharp clarity of her thoughts. The Venetian mirror's theft had been unravelled, but the final threads of the tale needed weaving, and she knew the confession must be complete to restore the manor's peace. Miss Marple's voice, gentle yet firm, broke the silence. "Mr. Pike," she said, her eyes steady behind her spectacles, "you've admitted to taking the mirror for your vault. But such a task, moving a heavy piece through the manor's side door, arranging a cart at midnight, required planning. Tell us how it was done and why." "The truth, I find, is often its own relief." Mr. Pike's gaunt face crumpled further, his hands trembling as they rested on the table. His eyes, once glittering with obsession, now held a haunted sheen. He glanced at Lady Beatrice, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant to harm you, Lady Beatrice." The mirror. It was a masterpiece, a piece of history that deserved to be cherished, not left to gather dust in a hall where few appreciated its true value. He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to his hands. I couldn't bear the thought of it staying here, unseen by those who understand its worth. Lady Beatrice's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Her silence a command for him to continue. Miss Marple's needles, resting in her lap, seemed to wait with her, their quiet presence a reminder of her patience. "I offered to buy it," Mr. Pike went on, his voice gaining a faint edge of defiance. "A generous sum, more than its market value, but you refused, Lady Beatrice." I understood, or I thought I did. But the idea of it, of owning it, grew in me. I couldn't sleep for thinking of it, its arabesques, its perfect glass. I've spent my life collecting beauty, preserving it. This was no different, or so I told myself. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of quiet curiosity. "And so you planned its removal," she said. "The side door, the cart? How did you arrange it?" He hesitated, his fingers twisting together. I knew the manor's routines from my visits. The side door was often left unlocked for deliveries, and Mr. Clarence was not always diligent about checking it late at night. I saw my chance after dinner. I left for the Black Swan, as I said, but I'd already contacted a carter in the city, a man I've used before for discreet acquisitions. I paid him well to wait near the side gate with a covered cart, to be ready at midnight. Mrs. Warrender gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Mr. Vance's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent. Mr. Clarence's face hardened, though Miss Marple noted a flicker of guilt in his eyes, perhaps for his lapse with the door. "I returned to the manor around 11, Mr. Pike continued, his voice low and strained. "I used the side door, which was unbolted, as I'd hoped. The hall was dark, the others gone to their rooms. I had a small wrench, gloved to avoid marks, and I worked quickly to loosen the mirror's bolts. It was heavy, but I'd brought a padded crate, hidden in the garden earlier that day. I eased it into the crate, careful not to damage the frame, and carried it to the side door. The scratch on the floor, I didn't mean for that, but the crate brushed the oak as I moved." Miss Marple nodded, her mind aligning his words with the evidence. The smudge from his gloved hand, the scratch from the crate, the boot print in the mud. "And the cart?" she prompted, her tone gentle but insistent. "The carter was waiting," Mr. Pike said, his voice barely audible. "I loaded the crate, and he drove north, to my vault in the city. I told him it was a private commission, no questions asked. I returned to the inn by 11:30, slipping in quietly. No one saw me, or so I thought." His eyes flicked to Miss Marple, a mix of resignation and awe in his gaze. "I underestimated you, Miss Marple." Lady Beatrice's voice, sharp with hurt, cut through the room. "Why, Roland, you were a guest in my home. Why steal what you could not have?" Mr. Pike's shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling. "I don't know, Beatrice. It was madness, a fever. I saw the mirror and thought only of possessing it, of keeping it safe in my collection, where I could study it, love it. I'm sorry, truly I am. I'll return it, undamaged. It's in the vault, as I said." Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her resolve remained firm. "Passion can blind us, Mr. Pike, but it does not excuse betrayal. The police will need to verify your story, and the mirror must be restored to its place. Lady Beatrice nodded, her expression a mix of sorrow and resolve. "I trusted you, Roland," she said quietly. "That trust is broken, but I want the mirror back." "Jane, will you see to it?" Miss Marple inclined her head, her voice calm. "I shall inform the authorities, Beatrice. They'll handle the recovery." She turned to Mr. Pike, her gaze steady. "You've done right to confess, Mr. Pike. It's a start." Mr. Clarence stepped forward, his voice clipped. "Shall I fetch the constable, Lady Beatrice?" His tone held a trace of satisfaction, as if Pike's guilt absolved his own lapses. Lady Beatrice nodded, and he left the room, his steps brisk. Mrs. Warrender, her face pale, murmured, "I can't believe it." "To think it was one of us." Mr. Vance, silent until now, cleared his throat. "A shocking business," he said, his voice strained, "but at least it's over." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on them, noting their relief, perhaps too quick. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a thief's confession had masked a deeper conspiracy. But here, Mr. Pike's account fit the evidence: the smudge, the scratch, the cart's path north. His obsession, his knowledge of the frame, his letter to a dealer, all had pointed to him, and his confession sealed the truth. As the room emptied, Lady Beatrice remained, her hands trembling slightly. "Jane, how did you know?" she asked, her voice soft with awe. Miss Marple's smile was modest, her needles tucked away. "People, my dear, are much like my knitting patterns. They seem complex, but the stitches are simple when you study them." Mr. Pike's passion was his unravelling. She rose, her shawl drawn close, ready to assist the police in recovering the mirror, her task nearly complete. Chapter 12. The Manor Restored. The morning sun broke through the mist that clung to Haverford Manor, bathing its stone facade in a golden warmth that seemed to promise renewal. The grand hall, so recently marred by the absence of its Venetian mirror, now hummed with a quiet sense of restoration. The mirror had been recovered from Mr. Roland Pike's city vault, its gilded frame and flawless glass undamaged, thanks to the swift intervention of the local constable, guided by Miss Jane Marple's precise instructions. The police had arrived at dawn, their inquiries discreet but thorough, and the mirror was reinstated on its oak-panelled wall, its arabesques gleaming once more under the chandelier's light. The manor's heart, so wounded by betrayal, began to beat again, though the scars of trust broken lingered in the air. Miss Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting bag at her feet, her needles clicking softly as she shared a final cup of tea with Lady Beatrice Ashford. The room was bright with morning light, the heavy curtains drawn back to reveal the gardens, where the last roses bowed under the weight of dew. Lady Beatrice, though still pale, carried a new resolve in her posture, her hands steady as she poured the tea. The other suspects, Mr. Clarence, Mrs. Warrender, and Mr. Vance, had been cleared of complicity, their motives and movements overshadowed by Mr. Pike's confession, yet Miss Marple, ever watchful, noted their quiet relief, a sign that each had feared the spotlight of her inquiry. "Jane," Lady Beatrice said, her voice soft but fervent, "I don't know how to thank you. The mirror is back, and though I'll never look at it quite the same, it's home. You saw what none of us could. How did you do it?" Miss Marple's smile was modest, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. "People, my dear Beatrice, are much the same wherever you go. They carry their desires and their secrets, and those secrets leave traces, like threads in a tapestry. Mr. Pike's passion for the mirror was too fierce to hide. It shone in his eyes, his words, his restlessness. The village whispers, the smudge, the scratch, they all pointed to him, and his confession was merely the final stitch. Lady Beatrice nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "I trusted him, Jane." To think he could betray that trust for a piece of glass. She shook her head, her expression a mix of sorrow and resolve. "The others, Clarence, Evelyn, Hugo, they're shaken, but I believe they're innocent." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze thoughtful. "Innocent of the theft, perhaps," she said gently, "but each had their own burdens. Mr. Clarence's debts, Mrs. Warrender's extravagance, Mr. Vance's faltering business, they all cast shadows, yet none matched the evidence as Mr. Pike's obsession did. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a gardener's envy had led to petty theft, but here only one hand had wielded the wrench that freed the mirror. The drawing-room door opened, and Mr. Clarence entered, his butler's blacks as pristine as ever. He bowed slightly, his face a mask of professionalism. "The mirror is secure, my lady," he said. "The constable has left, and Mr. Pike is in custody, awaiting transport to the city. He asked me to convey his apologies again." Lady Beatrice's lips tightened, but she nodded. "Thank you, Clarence. We'll speak no more of him." Her tone was firm, a sign of her intent to move forward. Mr. Clarence retreated, his steps silent, though Miss Marple noted a lingering tension in his shoulders. Perhaps guilt for the side door's lapse, or relief at his own exoneration. Mrs. Warrender and Mr. Vance had departed earlier, their farewells brief but polite. Mrs. Warrender's laughter had been subdued, her sapphire brooch pinned firmly in place, as if to anchor her shaken charm. Mr. Vance had clutched his sketchbook, murmuring about finishing the hall's curtains, his eyes avoiding the mirror's restored gleam. Miss Marple had watched them go, her mind satisfied that their secrets, while real, had not extended to theft. As the tea grew cold, Lady Beatrice leaned forward, her voice soft. "Will you stay another day, Jane? The manor feels safer with you here." Miss Marple's smile was warm, but she shook her head. "I must return to St. Mary Mead, my dear. My garden needs tending, and my neighbours will be expecting their gossip. But you've no need to worry. The manor is whole again, and you're stronger than you know." She rose, her shawl drawn close, and Lady Beatrice walked her to the door, where a carriage waited to take her to the village station. The hall, as they passed through, seemed to breathe with renewed life, the mirror reflecting the morning light in a dance of gold and glass. Miss Marple paused, her eyes lingering on it, a quiet satisfaction in her heart. As the carriage rolled down the lane, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the village, to the small dramas that awaited her at home. She recalled a saying from her youth, that beauty, like truth, reveals itself in time. The mirror's return was proof of that, and she felt a quiet pride in her part. Her needles, tucked in her bag, would resume their work, just as she would resume her watch over St. Mary Mead, where secrets like roses always bloomed anew.